I'm Matthew Kerbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is only for educational and entertainment purposes. Enjoy the show. Well, we're live. Welcome, live viewers. You're only going to see that part if you're actually live because I get to edit out the front and the back on LinkedIn Live. So that's what you get for attending early on a LinkedIn Live for Law Subscribed Live. This is a special episode. I'm thrilled to have with me the one and only Dazza Greenwood, expert thought leader in the space of AI as it applies to legal. Dazza's got a great website. It's DazzaGreenwoodHisName.com, backend powered by Substack, much like LawSubscribe.com. I highly recommend folks check that out just for the quick background because I care more about what's in your head than your background. But just in case my audience hasn't heard of you yet, Dazza, give us the quick background, quick bio.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew. It's great to be here. And I've been following your work for some time as well. My background is I was a technologist doing public sector and political systems back in the early 90s and ended up going to law school partly to try to understand what the legal issues were that people kept telling me were so very important, on campaigns or, in government, and even with technology, I'm sure you and all your listeners know as attorneys, many of us now, that there are many factors to consider, but as a non-lawyer, I found it quite confounding. And sometimes I would get different, advice from different lawyers and I couldn't evaluate it. So anyway, I ended up going to law school and then practicing technology law. And that was really great. So now I feel like I've got a firm grounding on what the law is, so I can comfortably go back to technology where I'm doing my very best work, I think, basically prototyping and building systems and assisting companies and governments with their technology rollouts. And in particular, where there's a legal wrinkle or some additional set of requirements and constraints because it's like a regulated industry or it's a contract system or whatever. So that's my sweet spot. And I also have an academic habit, I guess you could say. So I like to do some research that's not really possible to do with the constraints of, deliverables and scopes for consulting or when I'm embedded with companies, quarterly profits and, other sorts of imperatives don't necessarily allow you to think a thought all the way through. And I'm able to do that, very lucky with a research affiliation at MIT, where over the years I've sort of built up a bit of a research pulse there. And you can learn more about all that at law.MIT.edu. And the focus there is a little bit more kind of over the horizon. And over the horizon has come. And so just to bring us up to date, that's a lot of backstory. But now what I've always been yearning for is computers that could actually do some of the cognitive type of work that law practice and other commercial and kind of economic and social activities require. And now we have it with the current generation of artificial intelligence, generative AI. And I couldn't be happier with how it's going so far. These difficult, nuanced, subtle, very qualitative use cases that were always beyond the reach of technology before are no longer intractable. Now they are capable of being worked on with technology. And so, as you can imagine, based on my technical and legal kind of North Pole, South Pole interests, well, now we've got one unified planet of happiness with generative AI. So what I'm about now is generative AI.
Yeah, and so am I. And recently I've dropped on my LinkedIn the title of AI expert, and I just call myself AI enhanced because it's so complicated. And frankly, Dazza, you're one of the thought leaders that I follow to learn more about what's happening in AI.
Thank you.
And so I'm just an AI enhanced person. Let's just call it that. And it's Gen AI. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but folks are just now referring to AI colloquially. And what they really mean is generative AI. And now it's just completely supplanted the previous idea of AI from what I've seen. So I've just been calling it AI these days. Have you seen that?
I have. And, it's funny. I started with AI in the 80s, believe it or not, in a computer science course. I implemented one of the early AI chatbots. I think the first chatbot, arguably called Eliza, which came out of MIT. And I implemented it in Lisp, which was a pretty good language for things like symbolic logic and other stuff like that. And so what I learned AI was, and then later when I went to MIT and got and was in the media lab, some of the grandfathers of what AI had primarily been were there. And it's kind of, pure logic, symbolic kind of, systems that are more, akin to what we would call classical computing, like think like a calculator and if-then statements, that kind of thing.
Right.
And that's really, and people thought that if we could just layer enough of that together, that that should be sufficient to do what our rather superficial view apparently was of how how the human brain and mind is the word I'll use works. Now, with these newer methods, with generative AI, it really is different. And I honestly didn't do much with AI before generative AI. I was aware of it. I tracked it. It was useful for certain things in commerce and had some curious results in research. But it's this generative AI, the transformer-based kind of high-dimensional vector space, and the way it can, in a sense, see and cogently deal with concepts, not just like word searches and if-then statements, is truly remarkable. And I think ordinarily, I don't like it when new technologies take over the word space so that, the words that used to mean one thing no longer mean that. It's now the new thing. I don't mind it right now. I think this is the right thing to be talking about.
Yeah.
And when I say AI, I actually myself now mean generative AI, although for 35 years I totally didn't mean that.
Right.
I'm happy with this change. This is what I would call a step up.
Yes. Yeah. And as I'm not a researcher or scientist by any means, but I have an almost 4-year-old. And so when she's started to learn language, I've been able to compare a small human learning language with LLMs being on the scene and getting better and better and better. And really the parallels are unbelievable. Like the way, it's unstructured data is the term that I've heard used, and its ability to comprehend unstructured data, which mirrors like how a human understands that.
Yeah, so true. Mirrors is an interesting word. I'd say it's got some astonishing parallels, or it's comparable in some ways if you just look at it like a black box, like inputs and outputs. What's going on behind the, curtain, or like behind the eyes of your child and behind the, the server, carapace of the Gen AI, kind of engines is totally different, almost completely different. And yet, I don't hold that against it. To me, I'm very much interested in results. And the results we get are comparable to human reasoning, I would say, and comparable to, thinking processes and kind of cognition. And I'm here for it. But to me, it's all about kind of evaluating it. But you're right, like on the surface, it's almost magical feeling, how it can be so similar to the way humans have acquired language, sort of, and how we're able to intuit, what things mean and, make the right sets of inferences and even have a sense of a world model. Like, I don't know if you've been playing with Sora that just dropped yesterday for the rest of us. I missed my chance to sign up, so I'm waiting, but my friends have it. And, this isn't words now, it's images and video, but it's comparable. So when you basically give it enough data and you have it process using these new methods, it can begin. There's this emergent capability that arises where it sort of sees these patterns and it kind of groks is the word they say, or has this deep, almost intuitive like understanding of what the underlying like physics are. So with Sora, it's like when the person moves the ball and it goes like this and then things fall, it's as though we had programmed in, like an old game or military simulations, all the physics for like the ballistics and all the other things that we had to do in those kinds of simulations. But it doesn't have anything like that. It's just looking at the patterns and intuiting, where you would move your hand to catch the ball. With the language, and then with things as nuanced as the law, it's a type of social physics that it's developing a world model of. And it's hard to distinguish from people other than the fact that it's better. I mean, people, right? I know people, I'm a person. This stuff is better than what I will typically do when I prompt it right. It's way better than most of my colleagues, with all due respect to those of you who are listening. Like, I'm just calling it like it is. It's like people, but it's better.
I want the AI surgeon. Like, not right now, But maybe 5 years from now, if I have a choice like where it's going between AI surgeon and human surgeon, I want human in the loop AI surgeon, but not too much in the loop, because we've seen, right, from some studies that when you do human in the loop versus just pure AI, sometimes the just pure AI gets it better.
Yeah, I think I posted a little bit of this to LinkedIn, but that is absolutely that's happened. And we have this mantra, which I think is based on our sense that we are the center of the universe, and like whatever, like the sun revolves around us and all technology revolves around us, and we are the pinnacle of everything. And I don't want to get like religious or get into people's ideology, but I think demonstrably we can observe that this stuff is better. And it's funny, I'm saying words like better. Let me just unpack that very quickly. I can hear, especially these European doom-like critics out there who will sometimes nip at the heels of the advances we're making, saying things like, yes, but when you do these like specific evaluations, it cannot, do the math, or it cannot do, and it can't do, pure logic. That's absolutely right. It does not have that. It's not that type of classical computational model, and it has limits. And it is worse than some people, and it's worse than some computer programs at doing certain specific tasks. The thing that I'm present to, and the reason I'm throwing around these big words like better, is like I was just in a meeting earlier today where somebody was doing financial projections, and they didn't put it through the spreadsheet first. And then they were like a little bit off, because the human, while we're capable of doing pure logical reasoning, we have fuzzy meat brains. It's not like we're some sort of perfect, Platonic example of classical computing at its zenith. Hell no. And this stuff is also a little bit fuzzy. And then they put it in the spreadsheet, and it was worse because his macros are off. It was
Of course.
You're dealing with a low bar here with human beings. And it's so here for this more, especially those powerful foundation models, man. They are really good. I almost used a swear word that starts with kick.
We could just like have fun with this all day, but let's bring it back in towards the legal profession a little bit, right? And everything we've just been talking about, if you're a lawyer, or even a lay person, you might think, well, that's the end of lawyers. And I don't think that, and we could have that debate, but that's not the debate I want to have right now. I think first what ends is the billable hour. I think it's been more profitable for a long time to not bill by the hour. And I was making that argument from 2019 to 2021. And then in 2022, when Gen AI hit the scene, all of a sudden now this is a more compelling reason for why billing time just doesn't make sense in this world anymore. So with all the efficiencies brought on by Gen AI, now we have a version of it, agentic AI, which, for the sake of time, I'll just point everyone to your November 22nd, 2024 article. So we'll just assume they read that and come back to this point in the conversation. So don't explain agentic AI. Let's assume our listeners know what that is. What ramifications does agentic AI have for changing the business model of legal services in private practice?
What a great question. And so first of all, I agree that this, I guess I call it an application type of generative AI, which is agentic, or basically wrapping it in an application that that does like a series of prompts and has other things like memory, and can use tools or like APIs, integrate with other technologies so that it can accomplish more complex tasks and processes. So I did sort of define it a little. It is important, and it's a bit of a game changer. So the raw technology of this, actually, it's kind of good. I got like one of my seasonal candles going here. It smells really good. I think like Gen AI, like just the base models, is like fire in a sense. It's almost elemental, and it is good. And fire is great. It changed everything in our society, and with our capabilities. But when you can start to apply that to certain, to more specific uses, it's a force multiplier. It's like we have a blowtorch, that's different from something that could also potentially escape and be like a wildfire. Or when you have like a torch where, see, et cetera, you can cook, on and on. That's what agents are like. And so I think, well, the raw the raw primitive capabilities of generative AI are potent, and with clever lawyers and good IT departments, they could be game changers to change the business model. And I know that's true. I've done enough sort of consulting, especially with in-house and with firms, and and professional services companies to know that. You had to meet it almost more than halfway, unless you were that rare power user kind of lawyer. Not so much with the agent stuff. So like once people sort of look at the application layer that's bound in a context that has, maybe more expected inputs and outputs, and it's a place where you can encode your relevant context and your kind of train of thought, or your the standard operating procedures and all the stuff that you would do. Now that becomes almost like more like a component you can slot in. And when you start slotting these things in, you can get a kind of a new information architecture that is a lot of what a law firm does. And the first people that get good at what would I say, like recombobulating, refactoring their intelligence and their practices, their wisdom and their experience into the shape of these multi-agent systems. Sorry, I'm going to tune out in a sec. These systems, and they can start to pose them together into like lines of business and different types of client work or different sorts of processes that they have. They, I think, are going to be able to totally change their cost structure and also break through quality ceilings that we've always had with limited resources of how many people and like, still our brains are all stuck in these like, skulls. And we don't really have like a lot more power when you get 15 versus 150 associates around the table as coordination cost. Not anymore. Like you can really unleash the high potential of this cognitive capability. And so I think that has a cost and a quality and a time element. Well, the three things in business are you can have like quality, you can have speed, or you can have, cost. Like pick two at most, usually one, and sometimes none. Now we can have all three. And so now the matter, I think now it's sort of a race of the savvy and the scrappy within law to basically outperform and outcompete by innovating the nature of the practice of law and how you compose that within the firm, a literal firm, and also the Chicago Economic School sense of what is a firm, what's an economic entity. Like we're there, and like those people at Flatiron. I'll just name names a little bit. I think you must know them.
They're on an upcoming episode of the podcast. Yeah.
They're great. So everyone should listen to Matthew's podcast and listen to these folks. They're an example. You are an example, Matthew, with your subscription-based service. And it's not going to be today. It's not going to be tomorrow. But the lethargy and the entropy and the fear that inhibits people in law from adapting to these economic changes that have been unleashed as a result of this new critical capability are going to get run over. And the little guys that can go fast and adapt and can scale, which is a Silicon Valley kind of thing, are going to win. But I imagine we'll see some portion. And this is true with a lot of fundamentally disruptive technologies, some of the incumbents will adapt. Some of the incumbents will, be acquired or, kind of spin off and kind of like almost adapt, but they won't be the same anymore. You won't recognize them. And then some will not make it. And so, there's choice involved in this. And so I think the trick now is to get good at this stuff, to understand it, to experiment with new business models and experiment with cost, with quality, and with speed.
I love that answer. I'm going to end with actually a question because Dazza and I both have to be somewhere in a couple minutes. So for a future conversation, because I think everything you said is right, I think lawyers should be paying very close attention if they aren't already to this. And I really think if like the legal ethics of it all and the prohibition on unlicensed practice of law and not even really clearly defining what that is, like that could be a hampering. Like I have to turn away clients. I try to refer them all the time because I'm only licensed to practice law in Illinois and I practice primarily state law, right? So if I create these agents that could do my bidding and I'm able to refine them in such a way with my expertise and my knowledge, et cetera, and I'm playing around with Notebook LM and such to like do some things like that, right? Like I'm still prohibited from doing it outside of my state or even like, is that unlicensed practice of law if an agent is doing it, but I'm overseeing it? Like these are unanswered questions that I think our profession needs to answer because if we don't, everything's just going to move ahead without us. And whether we like it or not, the way that legal services are taken care of may be taken out of the profession's hands. So I don't know if you could comment on that in 30 seconds and then we'll say goodbye.
Sure. Yeah, I think for the time being, just assume the agents that you have are technical agents, not like human agents and assume that they're extensions of you, just like capability extenders. And so, to the extent that, geographic or other restrictions or licensing restrictions totally apply to your tools as well. That may change over time. There's people in various states already looking at some of the very cool, more advanced agent things where I was talking about how the nature of the firm will change. There's some little startups that are people trying to create completely agentic startups. We're still a few steps from that happening. That's on OpenAI's roadmap. They say that's basically AGI is when you have organizations working. So that's going to happen. But for now, just assume it's the same as you. And I guess the last super quick thing I'll say is think about finding simple agents you can play with so that you can, when people say agents, it's not a mystery or they don't like flamboozle you with hype talk. And like Crew AI is a simple no code one. LangGraph is one if you're more technical. AutoGen by Microsoft. I'm really into something called Model Context Protocol by Anthropic. I'm going to the Anthropic hackathon tonight in San Francisco to go deeper into that protocol, which is good for agents. But just get your hands dirty a little bit so that this word agent isn't unfamiliar to you, but you won't really understand it like you understand word processor. It's a tool that you should get and then think about how to apply so you can compete and win.
So amazing. In a legal tech and legal business podcast, we've covered Prometheus, Copernicus, and Plato. So Dazza, if that's really hooked listeners and watchers, if they wanted to follow up with you or stay in touch or follow what you're doing, what's the best ways for them to do all that?
Thanks. Probably my company, if you want me to help you compete and win, is civics.com, and it's a service I provide. For research, go to law.MIT.edu. For my weird thoughts and, like explanations of agents that you were mentioning, Matthew, just go to my blog, DazzaGreenwood.com. But really where I hang out is LinkedIn. So you'll probably have some linky thing on your live that you can go to my LinkedIn profile, but that's where I kind of am on a day-to-day basis. And I'd love to talk to you on LinkedIn, especially if you're doing cool things with agents in law or agents in general.
All right, well, stick around for 5 more seconds so the LinkedIn Live gets everything. Dazza Greenwood, one last time, thanks for coming on Law Subscribed Live.
Thank you so much, Matthew. It's been a real pleasure.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. The best way to get in touch is to follow and message me on LinkedIn. To get extra content, subscribe to the newsletter at www.lawsubscribe.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber to get episodes and content early. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.